Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. At the beginning of October 1815, about an hour before sunset, a man travelling on foot entered the town of Digne. The few people who happened to be at their windows or doorways observed him with a vague misgiving. It would have been hard to find a traveller of a more disreputable aspect. He was a man of medium height, broad-shouldered and robust, who might have been in his late 40s. A cap with a low-leathered peak half hid his face. He wore threadbare trousers and a tattered grey jacket. On his back was a new and bulging soldier's knapsack, and he carried a very large knotted stick. His stockingless feet were in hobnail shoes, and his beard was long. He turned towards the town hall, which he entered, emerging from it a quarter of an hour later. The stranger then made for an inn, and entered by way of a kitchen which opened directly onto the street. All the cooking stoves were lighted, and a fire burned brightly in the hearth. The innkeeper, who was also the cook, was busy amongst his pots and pans. "What can I do for you, monsieur?" "A meal and a bed," said the stranger. "By all means." But at this moment the innkeeper turned his head. After glancing at the visitor, he added, "Provided you can pay for it." "I have money," said the stranger, producing a shabby leather purse from his jacket pocket. "In that case, you're welcome." The man returned the purse to his pocket, dropped his knapsack on the floor by the door, and keeping hold of his stick, seated himself on a low stool by the fire. While the stranger warmed himself, seated with his back turned to the room, the worthy innkeeper, Jacquin Labarre, got a pencil out of his pocket and tore a strip off a newspaper lying on a table by the window. He scribbled a line or two, folded the strip, and handed it to a youngster who appeared to serve him as a scullery boy and personal attendant. He murmured a few words, and the boy ran off in the direction of the town hall. The stranger had seen nothing of this. He asked, "Will dinner soon be ready?" "Quite soon," the innkeeper replied. The boy returned with a scrap of paper, and the innkeeper unfolded it with the promptness of someone who has been anxious for a reply. He read the message with care, then nodded his head and stood for a moment reflecting. Finally he went over to the stranger. "I'm sorry, monsieur. I can't have you here." "Why? Are you afraid I shan't pay? Do you want me to pay in advance? I tell you I've got the money." "It isn't that." The words seemed to shake the stranger. "But I'm dropping with hunger. I've been walking since daybreak. I've covered 12 leagues. I must have something to eat." The innkeeper bent over him and said in a deliberate tone, "Get out." The man rose, took up his knapsack, and left. He walked off, seemingly at random along the main street, keeping close to the house fronts, his attitude one of dejected humiliation. It was growing dark. He looked about him, seeking some shelter for the night. He came to the prison. A bell chain hung by the doorway, and he pulled it. A panel in the door slid back. "Monsieur," said the man, removing his cap, "will you be so kind as to let me in, and give me lodging for the night?" "This is a prison, not an inn," said the voice of the doorkeeper. "If you want to be let in, you must get yourself arrested." The panel closed. The stranger moved on into a narrow street, where there were a great many gardens, some enclosed only by hedges to give it a cheerful appearance. Night was closing in, and the cold alpine wind was blowing. By the last gleam of daylight, the stranger saw in one of the gardens flanking the lane a sort of hut, which looked as though it had been made of turfs. Clambering resolutely over a low wooden fence, he went to examine it. It had a very low, narrow doorway, and seemed to be one of those temporary shelters which road workers put up. This was what he assumed it to be. He was cold and famished. Hunger he was resigned to, but here at least was some protection against the cold. Places of this sort were not generally occupied at night. Lying flat on his stomach, he wriggled inside. It was warm, and there was a bedding of straw. For a moment he lay motionless, too exhausted to move. At this moment he heard a fierce sound of growling, and looking up saw the head of a large bull mastiff outlined against the faint light beyond the entrance. The hut was a dog kennel. Grasping his stick and using his knapsack as a shield, the man fought his way out, not without further damage to his tattered clothes. "I am not even a dog," he exclaimed. Being unfamiliar with the streets, he resumed his haphazard wanderings. As he crossed the cathedral square, he shook his fist at the church. Exhausted and with no further hope, the outcast stretched himself on a stone bench by a doorway in the square. An elderly lady who came out of the cathedral at this moment saw him lying there and asked, "What are you doing?" He answered, roughly and angrily, "My good woman, you can see what I'm doing. I'm sleeping here." "On this bench?" she asked. "I've slept for 19 years on a wooden mattress," the man said. "Now it's stone." "Why don't you go to an inn?" "Because I haven't any money." "Have you tried everything? You can't possibly spend the night here. You must be cold and hungry. Someone would surely take you in out of charity." "I've knocked at every door." The lady touched his arm and pointed across the square to a small house beside the bishop's palace. "Have you knocked at that one?" "No." "Then do." That evening the Bishop of Digne, after returning from his customary walk through the town, was working late when there was a heavy knock on the door. "Come in," said the bishop. The door was flung widely open, as though in response to a vigorous and determined thrust. A man entered. We know the man already. The firelight falling on his face disclosed an expression of exhaustion, desperation, and brutish defiance. He was an ugly and terrifying spectacle. He said, in a harsh voice, "Look, my name is Jean Valjean. I'm a convict on parole. I've done 19 years in prison. They let me out 4 days ago, and I'm on my way to Pontarlier. I walked from Toulon in 4 days, and today I covered 30 miles. When I reached this place I went to an inn, and they turned me out because of my papers, which I'd shown at the town hall, as I'm obliged to do. Nobody wants me anywhere. I've got 109 francs and 15 sous, the money I earned by 19 years' work in prison. I'm ready to pay. Will you let me stay?" It was the bishop's turn to speak. "Sit down and warm yourself, monsieur. Supper will very soon be ready, and a bed can be made up while you're having a meal." And now the man whose face had been so hard and sombre was suddenly and remarkably transformed. "Monsieur le curé," said the man, "you're very good. You don't despise me. You've taken me in, though I've not concealed from you where I've come from and what I am." The bishop laid a hand gently on his arm. "You need have told me nothing. This house is not mine, but Christ's. It does not ask a man his name, but whether he is in need. You are in trouble. You are hungry and thirsty, and so you are welcome. You need not thank me for receiving you in my house. Everything in it is yours. Why should I ask your name? In any case, I knew it before you told me." The man looked up with startled eyes. "You know my name?" "Of course," said the bishop. "Your name is Brother." After the meal, the bishop picked up one of 2 silver candlesticks on the table and handed the other to his guest, saying, "I will show you to your room, monsieur." The man followed him. In the small room the bed was newly made. The man put his candle on a little table. "Sleep well," said the bishop. "Before you leave tomorrow, you must have a bowl of warm milk from our cows." "Thank you, monsieur l'abbé," the man said. The bishop gravely raised his right hand, the first 2 fingers extended, and blessed the man, after which he turned, and without looking back, went to his own room. As for the man, he was so utterly exhausted that he could not even enjoy the luxury of clean white sheets. After blowing out the candle with his nostril, as convicts do, he stretched himself fully clad on the bed, and sank instantly into a profound slumber. Jean Valjean came from a very poor peasant family in Brie. All his youth had been spent in hard and ill-paid labour. He was never known to have a sweetheart, having no time to fall in love. His work as a tree pruner brought him 24 sous a day during the season, and at other times he worked as a harvester, cattleman, or at any other form of casual labour. And then came a particularly hard winter. Jean was out of work, and there was no food in the house. Literally no bread. One Sunday night, when the baker was getting ready for bed, he heard a sound of shattered glass from his barred shop window. He reached the spot in time to see an arm thrust through a hole in the pane. The hand grasped the loaf, and the thief made off at a run. The baker chased and caught him. He had thrown away the loaf, but his arm was bleeding. The thief was Jean Valjean. This was in the year 1795. Valjean was tried in the local court for housebreaking and robbery. He was found guilty. The penal code was explicit. Jean Valjean was sentenced to 5 years' hard labour. He was taken to Toulon, where he arrived chained by the neck, after a journey of 27 days in a cart. Here he was clad in a red smock, and everything that had been his life was blotted out, even to his name. He was no longer Jean Valjean, but number 24601. Jean Valjean's first chance to escape came towards the end of his 4th year. His fellow prisoners helped him, as was customary. He got away, and for 2 days drifted in freedom through the countryside. If to be tracked is freedom, to be constantly on the alert, to tremble at every sound. On the evening of the 2nd day he was caught. He had neither eaten nor slept for 36 hours. The tribunal added 3 years to his sentence, making 8 in all. His second turn came in the 6th year, and again he used it, but with even less success. His absence was discovered at roll call. The alarm gun was fired, and that night the watch found him in the dockyard, hiding beneath the keel of a vessel which was under construction. He fought against them, and for the crimes of attempted escape and resisting arrest, the code prescribed the penalty of an additional 5 years, 2 in double chains. 13 years. His third turn came in the 10th year, and again he tried and failed. For this he got another 3 years, making 16. It was in the 13th year, I believe, that he made his last attempt. He was out for only 4 hours, but they cost him another 3 years. 19 years altogether. He was released in October 1815, after being imprisoned in 1795, for having broken a window pane and stolen a loaf of bread. Jean Valjean had gone to imprisonment, despairing. He emerged, grim-faced. What had taken place in this man's soul? A detail which we must not fail to mention is that in physical strength, Jean Valjean far surpassed any other inmate of the prison. On fatigue duties, or hauling an anchor chain, or turning a capstan, he was worth 4 men. Once, when the balcony of the Toulon town hall was being repaired, one of the pillars which supported it came loose, and was in danger of falling. Valjean, who was on the spot, propped it up with his shoulder until help arrived. He spoke seldom, and never smiled. What could his thoughts be? Year by year, slowly but inexorably, his spirit had withered. During his 19 years' imprisonment, he had not shed a tear. At sunrise that morning, the bishop was coming in from his garden. His housekeeper came running out to him in great agitation. "Monseigneur, Monseigneur, do you know where the silver basket is?" "Yes," said the bishop. "Oh, thank the Lord! I couldn't think what had happened to it." The bishop had just retrieved the basket from one of the flower beds. He handed it to her, saying, "Here you are." "But it's empty," she exclaimed. Where's the silver?" "Oh, so it's the silver you're worrying about," said the bishop. "I can't tell you where that is." "Heavens! Say that it's been stolen. That man who came last night, the monster, he's gone off with our silver." The bishop, after a moment's pause, turned his grave eyes onto her and said gently, "Was it really ours?" At that moment a knock sounded on the door. The bishop called, "Come in." The door opened to disclose a dramatic group. 3 men were holding a 4th by the arms and neck. The 3 were gendarmes. The 4th was Jean Valjean. A sergeant of gendarmes entered the room and saluted. "Monseigneur," he began. But the bishop interrupted him. "So here you are," he cried to Valjean. "I'm delighted to see you. Had you forgotten that I gave you the candlesticks as well? They're silver, like the rest, and worth a good 200 francs. Did you forget to take them?" Jean Valjean's eyes widened. He was staring at the old man with an expression no words can convey. "Monseigneur," said the sergeant, "do I understand that this man was telling the truth? When we saw him, he seemed to be on the run, and we thought we had better make sure. We found this silver in his knapsack, and—" "And he told you," said the bishop, smiling, "that it had been given to him by an old priest, with whom he stopped the night. I can see how it was. You felt bound to bring him here, but you were mistaken." "You mean," said the sergeant, "that we can let him go?" "Certainly." The gendarme released Valjean, who seemed to cringe. "Am I really allowed to go?" he said, mumbling the words, as if he were talking in his sleep. "You heard, didn't you?" said the sergeant. "But this time," said the bishop, "you must not forget your candlesticks." He fetched them from the mantelpiece and handed them to Valjean. He turned to the gendarme. "Thank you, gentlemen." The gendarme withdrew. Valjean stayed motionless, as though he were on the verge of collapse. The bishop came up to him and said in a low voice, "Do not forget, do not ever forget that you have promised me to use the money to make yourself an honest man." Valjean, who did not recall having made any promise, was silent. The bishop concluded with solemn emphasis, "Jean Valjean, my brother, you no longer belong to what is evil, but to what is good. I have bought your soul to save it from black thoughts and from the spirit of perdition, and I give it to God." During the first quarter of this century, in the village of Montfermeil, not far from Paris, there existed a small tavern, which has since disappeared. In front of the tavern, 2 little girls, the elder aged about 2½ the younger aged 18 months, were playing. The 2 children looked well cared for. They were like roses on a scrap heap, their eyes bright, their pink cheeks round with laughter. The mother, the innkeeper's wife, a woman of no very attractive appearance, but likeable at that moment, was seated a few yards away in the doorway of the tavern. Suddenly a voice spoke from close beside her. "You have 2 very pretty children, madame." A young woman was standing before her. She too had a child which she held in her arms. She also had with her a large travelling bag which looked very heavy. The child was the most enchanting creature imaginable, a little girl of between 2 and 3, the prettiness of whose attire matched that of the innkeeper's children. The mother thanked her for the compliment, and invited her to sit on the bench by the door, while she herself remained seated on the step. "My name is Thénardier," she said. "My husband and I keep this inn." This Madame Thénardier was robust, big-boned, and red-headed. "What's your little girl's name?" she asked the stranger. Cosette. "It's wonderful how quickly children get to know each other," said Madame Thénardier. "Look at them. They might all be sisters." This, no doubt, was the encouragement the other mother had been hoping for. Taking Madame Thénardier's hand, she turned to her and said, "Will you look after my daughter for me?" The Thénardier woman started slightly. The mother, whose name was Fantine, went on, "I can't take her with me where I'm going. I have to find work, and it's not easy if you have a child. I think it was the hand of God that guided me here. When I saw your children so happy and clean and pretty, I thought to myself, that's a good mother. As you say, they would be like sisters. And besides, I shall soon come to fetch her. Will you look after her for me?" "We shall have to think about it," said Madame Thénardier. "I could pay 6 francs a month." At this point, a man's voice called from inside the house. "Not less than 7, and 6 months in advance." 6 times 7 makes 42, said Madame Thénardier. "Very well." "And another 15 francs for extras," called the man. "Total 57 francs, said the Thénardier woman. "You shall have them," said Cosette's mother. "I've got 80 francs. I shall still have enough to get me to my own town if I go on foot, and I'll find work, and when I've saved a little money, I'll come for her." After leaving Cosette with the Thénardiers, Fantine had journeyed on to her native town of Montreuil-sur-Mer. This was in the year 1821. It was 10 years since she had left the district, and in that time things had greatly changed. While she had been sinking into the depths of poverty as the mother of an illegitimate child, the town had grown prosperous. During the past 2 years there had occurred one of those industrial developments which are major events in the life of a small community. We must give some account of this matter, and indeed dwell upon it, since it is of some importance. The traditional local industry of Montreuil-sur-Mer was the manufacture of imitation English jet beads and the black clasp of Germany. Because of the cost of raw materials, the industry had never been prosperous, and its workers had been underpaid. But this situation had recently been transformed. Towards the end of 1815, a newcomer to the town had the idea of substituting shellac for resin, and had also devised a simpler and less expensive form of clasp for such things as bracelets. These trifling changes amounted to a revolution. They greatly reduced cost, which enabled the trade to pay higher wages, and thus benefited the district, and they made it possible to reduce prices while increasing the manufacturer's profit. 3 beneficial results. And in less than 3 years, the innovator had grown rich, which is good, and had spread prosperity around him, which is better. He was a stranger to the district. Nothing was known of his origins, and little about how he started in life. He was said to have arrived in the town with very little money, a few 100 francs, and with this skimpy capital, applied to the service of an ingenious idea, he had made a fortune for himself and for the community. His clothes, his general appearance, and his speech when he came to Montreuil-sur-Mer had been those of a labourer. But it seems that on the December evening when he unobtrusively entered the town with a pack on his back and a thorn stick in his hand, a serious fire had broken out in the town hall. Plunging into the flames, he had, at the risk of his own life, rescued 2 children, whose father, as it turned out, was the captain of gendarmerie. So no one had asked to see his identification papers. He went by the name of Père Madeleine. He was a man of about 50, reserved in manner, but good-hearted, and this was all that could be said about him. By 1820, 5 years after his arrival in Montreuil-sur-Mer, the services he had rendered were so outstanding, and public opinion was so unanimous, that the king appointed him mayor of the town. Père Madeleine had become Monsieur le Maire. Early in 1821, the newspapers announced the passing of the Bishop of Digne, who had died at the age of 82. His death was reported in the local paper at Montreuil-sur-Mer, and on the following day, Monsieur Madeleine appeared clad in black, with a band of crape round his hat. One man only was wholly immune from the contagion of popular feeling concerning the mayor, and regardless of what Monsieur Madeleine did, refused to succumb to it, as though from an unassailable instinct of wariness and distrust. This man's name was Javert, and in Montreuil-sur-Mer he performed the distasteful but necessary duties of a police inspector. He had not witnessed Madeleine's beginnings when he took up his present post, which he owed to the influence of the Paris prefect of police. The manufacturer's fortune was already made, though he had yet to become Monsieur le Maire. Javert had an eye constantly fixed on Monsieur Madeleine, an eye filled with suspicion and puzzlement. Madeleine had eventually become aware of this, but he seemed to regard it as a matter of no importance. He never questioned Javert, neither sought him out nor avoided him, and bore his heavy scrutiny without appearing to notice it, treating him as he treated everyone, with an easy good humour. Javert was plainly disconcerted by Monsieur Madeleine's ease and tranquillity of manner. But an occasion arose when his own strange demeanour attracted the notice of Monsieur Madeleine. What happened was as follows. Passing one morning through one of the unpaved alleys of the town, Madeleine heard sounds of disturbance, and saw a group of people gathered not far away. He found, on going up to them, that an old man known as Père Fauchelevent had been trapped beneath his cart after the horse had fallen on the muddy road. The horse had broken both hind legs and could not get up. Fauchelevent was caught between the wheels. The manner of the fall was such that the whole weight of the heavily loaded cart was on his chest. Attempts had been made to drag him clear, but without success. An ill-judged, clumsy movement, a sudden pull of the cart, might crush him. There was no way of releasing him except by lifting the cart from below. Javert, who was already on the spot, had sent for a jack. The crowd drew back respectfully as Madeleine approached. He at once asked if a jack was available, and was told that someone had gone for one to the nearest smithy, but that it would take a quarter of an hour to bring it. "This can't wait a quarter of an hour," said Madeleine, turning to the men standing round. "There's still room for a man to crawl under the cart and lift it on its back. In half a minute the old man could be pulled out. Is there anyone here with the muscle and the heart?" Monsieur Madeleine recognized Javert among the crowd. He had not noticed him before. "It's a question of strength," Javert said. "You need to be tremendously strong to lift a load like that on your back." With his eyes fixed upon Madeleine, he added slowly, "I have known only one man, Monsieur Madeleine, capable of doing what you ask." Madeleine started. Still with his eyes upon him, Javert said casually, "He was a convict." "Ah," said Madeleine. "In Toulon prison." Madeleine turned pale. Meanwhile the cart was sinking, and Père Fauchelevent was gasping and crying, "I am suffocating. My ribs are breaking. For God's sake, do something!" Madeleine hesitated for another instant, met the vulture gaze of Javert, looked round at the motionless bystanders, and smiled sadly. Without a word, he went on his knees, and before anyone could speak was under the cart. The onlookers stood breathless. The cart, with its load, was seen to rise slowly upward, its wheels half emerging from the quagmire. There was a sudden rush. The gallantry of a single man had lent strength and courage to all. The cart was lifted by 10 pairs of arms, and old Fauchelevent was saved. Madeleine got to his feet. He was white, although his face was running with sweat. His clothes were torn and caked with mud. The old man clasped him round the knees, invoking the name of God. His own expression was an indescribable mingling of distress and triumph, and he gazed calmly back at Javert, who was still fixedly regarding him. Fauchelevent had broken a kneecap in his fall. Monsieur Madeleine had him taken to the infirmary, served by 2 Sisters of Mercy, which he had set up in his factory for the benefit of his workers. On the following morning, the old man found a 1,000-franc note on the bedside table, with a note in Monsieur Madeleine's handwriting which read, "I am buying your horse and cart." The cart was damaged, and the horse was dead. Soon after this, Monsieur Madeleine was elected mayor, and when, for the first time, Javert saw him wearing the robes which vested him with full authority over the town, a tremor went through him, like that of a hound which scents a wolf in sheep's clothing. Thereafter he avoided him whenever possible, and when his duties obliged him to have direct dealings with the mayor, he addressed him in terms of the utmost formality. Such was the state of affairs when Fantine returned to the town. No one remembered her, but fortunately the doors of Madeleine's factory were open. She found employment in the women's workshop. But when the winter came, Fantine became ill, and was unable to continue to work. Fantine's debts grew. The Thénardiers bombarded her with letters, heart-rending in tone and ominous in their exactions. They wrote to say that Cosette was obliged to go almost naked in the cold, and that at least 10 francs were needed to buy her a woolen dress. Receiving this letter, Fantine carried it crumpled in her hand throughout the day, and in the evening went to the barber at the corner of the street, and withdrew her comb, letting her fair hair fall down to her waist. "Such beautiful hair," said the barber. "How much will you give me for it?" she asked. 10 francs. "Then cut it off." She bought a woolen dress and sent it to the Thénardiers, who were furious. The money was what they wanted. They gave the dress to their own daughter, Éponine, and Cosette went on shivering. "My daughter's not cold any more," thought Fantine. "I have dressed her in my hair." She wore small mob caps to hide her shorn head, and still looked pretty. But a dark change was taking place within her. Now that she could no longer do up her hair, she conceived a hatred for all mankind. In a spirit of defiance and with fury in her heart, she took a lover, a chance acquaintance, for whom she cared nothing. He was some sort of travelling musician, indolent and feckless. He beat her and finally left her, as repelled as she was herself. But still she worshipped her child. The deeper she sank, the darker the shades that closed about her, the more radiant did that vision appear. "Some day I'll be rich, and have Cosette with me," she said to herself. And this alone could cause her to smile. The cough did not get better, and she had night sweats. The following letter came from the Thénardier. "Cosette has caught the disease that is sweeping through the region, what they call military fever. The medicine is very expensive. It is ruining us, and we can no longer pay. If you do not send us 40 francs within a week, the child will die." This caused Fantine to burst into hysterical laughter. "Oh, how wonderful! A mere 40 francs! 2 Napoleons! Where do they expect me to get them? Are they mad?" Crossing the market square, she saw a crowd gathered round a strangely shaped vehicle, from which a man clad in red was addressing them. He was an itinerant dentist, selling sets of false teeth, opiates, powders, and elixirs. Drawing closer, Fantine joined in the laughter at his oratory, in which slang for the common people was interlaced with high-flown language for the well-to-do. And, seeing her laugh, the dentist cried, "You got a fine set of teeth, my lass. If you sell me your incisors, I'll pay you a gold Napoleon for each." "What are my incisors?" "Your 2 top front teeth." "Oh, how horrible!" exclaimed Fantine. 2 Napoleons?" grumbled a toothless old woman standing near. "She's in luck." Fantine fled, covering her ears to shut out the hoarse voice as he shouted after her, "Think it over, my girl. 2 Napoleons are worth having." That evening Fantine smiled at the 2 golden coins which lay on her bare table. The candle lighted her face. It was a blood-stained smile. There were flecks of blood at the corners of her mouth, and a wide gap beneath her upper lip. She sent the 40 francs to Montfermeil. Needless to say, the Thénardiers were lying. Cosette was not ill. Thénardier wrote to say that his patience was at an end, and that if she did not send him 100 francs forthwith, he would be obliged to turn Cosette out into the street, still convalescent after her grave illness, to fend for herself amid the rigours of the season, and live or die as the case might be. 100 francs. In what calling was it possible to earn that? There was only one. Well, thought Fantine, I may as well sell the rest. She became a prostitute. With Fantine standing miserably before him, Javert seated himself at his table, and getting out a sheet of officially stamped paper, began to write. What he had witnessed was undeniably a crime. A prostitute had assaulted a citizen. He, Javert, had seen it with his own eyes. He wrote in silence. When he had finished writing, he signed the document, folded it, and handing it to the duty sergeant, said, "Have this woman taken to the jail under guard." He then turned to Fantine and said, "You're getting 6 months." She uttered a cry of despair and fell to her knees. 6 months? 6 months in prison, earning 7 sous a day. But what about Cosette? What about my daughter? I still owe more than 100 francs to the Thénardier. Monsieur Inspecteur, did you know that? Without getting to her feet, she dragged herself across the floor, muddied as it was by the boots of many men, shuffling hastily on her knees with her hands clasped. Monsieur Javert, I beg you to be merciful. It was not my fault. If you had seen how it started, you would know. I swear by God it was not my fault. The gentleman, I don't know who he was, put snow down my back. Has anyone the right to put snow down a person's back when they're just walking past, doing no harm? It gave me a shock. I'm not very well, you see. And then he'd been saying unpleasant things to me. How ugly I was, about having lost my teeth. As if I didn't know. I didn't answer. I just thought, well, if it amuses him. And I walked quietly on. And that was when he put the snow down my back. Monsieur Javert, is there no one who saw what happened and can tell you? Oh, take pity on me, Monsieur Javert. Javert turned his back on her, and 2 policemen took her by the arms. A few minutes previously, a man had entered the police station unobserved. Closing the door behind him, he had remained with his back to it, listening to Fantine's despairing plea. Now, while the 2 men were trying to drag her to her feet, he emerged from the shadows and said, "One moment, if you please." Javert looked round and saw that it was Monsieur Madeleine. Monsieur Madeleine said, "Inspector Javert, this woman is to go free." Javert felt for a moment that he was going mad. "Monsieur le Maire, that cannot be allowed." "Why not?" asked Monsieur Madeleine. "The woman insulted a respectable citizen." "Listen to me, Inspector Javert," Madeleine said, in a calm, conciliatory voice. "I know you to be an honourable man, and I'm very ready to explain my actions to you. This is the truth of the matter. I was crossing the square when you took the woman away. There were still people about, and I asked what happened. I heard the whole story. The respectable citizen was at fault, and by the letter of the law, it was he who should have been arrested." "Monsieur le Maire, I cannot believe my ears." "Then you must be content to obey." "I have to do my duty. Duty requires me to send her to prison for 6 months. Monsieur Madeleine said quietly, You must be quite clear about this. She will not serve a single day in prison." These words emboldened Javert to look Madeleine full in the face. He said, still in a tone of profound respect, "It distresses me deeply to take issue with Monsieur le Maire. Nothing of the kind has ever happened to me before. But I must venture to remind Monsieur le Maire that I am acting within the terms of my authority." At this, Monsieur Madeleine folded his arms and said in a voice that had never before been heard in the town, "The regulations you refer to are those affecting the municipal police. Under Articles 9, 11, 15, and 66 of the Criminal Code, I have authority over them. I order you to release this woman." Javert made a last effort. "But, Monsieur le Maire, and let me also remind you of Article 81 of the law of 13th December 1799, dealing with arbitrary detention." "Monsieur le Maire, that's enough. But kindly leave the post," said Monsieur Madeleine. Javert received this body blow, standing as rigidly as a Russian soldier. Bowing low to the mayor, he turned and left. Fantine let him pass, staring at him in stupefaction as he did so. When he was gone, she fainted. Monsieur Madeleine had Fantine taken to the factory infirmary. She now had a raging fever, and for part of the night was delirious. Eventually, however, she fell asleep. When she awoke, about midday, she saw Monsieur Madeleine standing by her bedside. He had spent the night and morning ascertaining the facts, and now he knew the whole tragic story of Fantine. He said, "You have suffered very greatly, my poor child." Monsieur Madeleine wrote the following letter at Fantine's dictation, and then got her to sign it. "Monsieur Thénardier, you will hand Cosette over to the bearer. Everything owing will be paid. I send you my regards. Fantine." But at this point a most serious thing happened. On a morning when Monsieur Madeleine was busy in his own office, disposing of urgent business, in case he should find it necessary to go to Montfermeil, he was informed that Inspector Javert wished to speak to him. The name affected him disagreeably. Since their encounter in the police post, he had not seen Javert, who had been more careful than ever to avoid him. "Show him in," he said, and Javert entered. "Well, Javert, what is it?" Javert paused for a moment, as though to collect his thoughts. Then he said in a sad and solemn voice, that was not without ingenuousness, "Monsieur le Maire, a serious breach of discipline has been committed." "What breach?" "An inferior member of the public service has shown the utmost disrespect for a magistrate. I have come as in duty bound to inform you of the fact." "Who is the offender?" asked Madeleine. "Myself," said Javert. "You?" "Yes." "And who is this magistrate who has been disrespectfully treated?" "You are, Monsieur le Maire." Monsieur Madeleine started up in his chair. Javert proceeded inexorably, with eyes still lowered. "I have come, Monsieur le Maire, to ask you to recommend to the authorities that I should be dismissed." The astonished Madeleine opened his mouth to speak, but Javert cut him short. "I will explain, Monsieur le Maire." Javert heaved a deep sigh, and said in the same dispassionate, disconsolate voice, "I was so furious after our dispute 6 weeks ago over that woman that I denounced you." "You denounced me?" "To the Prefecture of Police, in Paris." Monsieur Madeleine, who was not much more given to laughter than Javert himself, now laughed heartily. "As a mayor who had encroached on the function of the police?" "No, as an ex-convict." Madeleine's expression abruptly changed. Javert, who was still staring at the floor, continued, "That is what I believed. I had the idea for a long time. A certain facial resemblance, the great physical strength you displayed in the Fauchelevent episode, your slight limp, all trifles. Nevertheless, I suspected you of being a man called Jean Valjean. What name did you say? Jean Valjean. He was a convict I saw 20 years ago, when I was a prison warder at Toulon. It seems that after being released, this Valjean committed a robbery at the house of the bishop. Efforts were made to rearrest him, but he managed to get away, and there has been no trace of him for several years. Well, I believed... Anyway, that is what I did. In my resentment, I denounced you in a letter to the Paris prefecture. Monsieur Madeleine had returned to the documents on his desk. He asked in an entirely casual voice, "And what did they say?" "They said I was mad." "And?" "And they were right." I'm glad you realize it." "They must be right, since the real Jean Valjean has been found." The sheet of paper fell from Madeleine's hand. He looked hard at Javert, and murmured expressionlessly, "Indeed?" "The Paris prefecture wrote back to me saying that I was out of my wits, and that Jean Valjean was in custody in Arras. I need not tell you of the shock this gave me. I obtained permission to go to Arras to see this man, who now calls himself Jean Mathieu, for myself." "And?" said Madeleine. "Truth is truth, Monsieur le Maire," said Javert, with the same sombre, implacable expression. "I am forced to admit that that man is Jean Valjean. I recognized him." Madeleine asked in a very low voice, "You're sure?" Javert gave a dry laugh of reluctant but absolute certainty. "Oh, yes, I'm sure. I must beg you to accept my profound apologies, Monsieur le Maire." Madeleine's only reply was an abrupt question. "And what does this man himself say?" "Well, you see, he's a cunning fellow. And that's another thing that makes me sure this is he. Where another man would be screaming the place down, ranting and raving, and swearing that he'd never heard of Valjean, this one behaves as though he simply didn't understand. My name's Jean Mathieu, and that's all I have to say. A kind of mulish stupidity, which is much more effective. Oh, he's clever, all right, but it won't work. The evidence is overwhelming. They have 4 people, including myself, who recognize him. He's to be tried at Arras Assizes, and I have been subpoenaed as a witness." Monsieur Madeleine had once again returned to the papers on his desk, and was once more poring over them and making notes, with the air of a man with many things on his mind. He looked up at the inspector. "Thank you, Javert. The details do not greatly interest me, and in any case I have business to attend to. You say you have to go to Arras. I take it that that will not be for a week or so." "Sooner than that, Monsieur le Maire. The case comes up tomorrow. I am catching the coach tonight." Monsieur Madeleine started slightly. "How long will it take?" "Certainly no more than a day. Sentence will be passed tomorrow evening at the latest, but I don't intend to wait for it, since there's no doubt what it will be. I shall leave directly I've given my evidence." "Good," said Madeleine. He made a gesture of dismissal, but Javert did not move. "Forgive me, Monsieur le Maire. I have to remind you of something." "Of what?" "That I must be dismissed from the service." Monsieur Madeleine rose to his feet. "Javert, you are an honourable man, and I respect you highly. You are exaggerating your offence, which in any case is a matter that only concerns myself. You deserve to go up in the world, Javert, not down. I want you to stay in your present post." Javert confronted the mayor with a clear-eyed gaze in which there was the glint of a narrow conscience. as rigid as it was upright. He said quietly, "I shall continue to perform my duties, Monsieur le Maire, until I have been replaced." He went out, and Monsieur Madeleine stood thoughtfully listening to the firm, decided footsteps as they died away down the corridor. During the afternoon following his interview with Javert, Monsieur Madeleine paid his regular visit to Fantine. Before doing so, he asked to see Sister Simplice, one of the 2 nursing sisters of the Order of St. Lazarus, who did duty in the infirmary. No one knew her age. She had never been young, and it seemed that she would never grow old. She was a calm and austere person, companionable but remote, who had never told a lie. The fact that she had never lied, had never spoken for any reason, or without reason, a word that was not strictly true, was a distinctive characteristic of Sister Simplice, the keynote of her virtue. Her unshakable truthfulness had made her almost celebrated in the community. She had conceived an affection for Fantine, no doubt perceiving the virtue latent within her, and had taken her almost wholly in her own charge. On this day Fantine had a high fever. Directly she saw Monsieur Madeleine, she asked, "And Cosette?" He answered, smiling, "Very soon." His manner towards her was normal, except that he stayed an hour instead of his usual half-hour, much to her delight. He stressed to everyone concerned that she must go short of nothing, and at one moment his face seemed to grow very sombre. But this was explained when it became known that the doctor had murmured to him that she was sinking fast. Then he returned to the mayor's office, where his clerk saw him carefully studying a road map of France that hung in his office. It was time for the case in Arras to be concluded. Ordering the accused to rise, the presiding judge put the formal question to him. "Have you anything to add in your defence?" The man stood twisting a grimy cap in his hands, seeming not to have heard. The judge spoke again. "Your position is one which must cause you to think twice. You are the object of very serious suspicions. In your own interest, I will ask you for the last time to give the court a plain answer to this question. Are you or are you not the released convict, Jean Valjean?" The accused shook his head. Then he looked down at his cap and up to the ceiling, and was silent. "Listen to me," the prosecutor said sternly. "You refuse to answer questions, and your refusal in itself condemns you. It is apparent that your name is not Jean Mathieu. You are the convict Jean Valjean, who at one time went by the name of Jean Mathieu, your mother's name. The jury cannot fail to draw this conclusion." The prosecutor now addressed the presiding judge. "Monsieur le Président, in view of the confused but shrewdly calculated denials we have heard from the accused, who is trying to pass himself off as an idiot, I request the court's permission to recall the witnesses Brevet, Cochepaille, and Chenildieu, and Inspector Javert, so that they may reaffirm their testimony identifying the prisoner with the convict Jean Valjean." In the absence of Javert, the prosecutor demanded the recall of the 3 other witnesses, so that they might be formally questioned. Brevet was brought back into court, escorted by a gendarme. "Brevet," said the president, "look hard at the man in the dock, and tell the court if, in all conscience, you still recognize him as your former prison mate, Jean Valjean." Brevet did as required, and then said, "Yes, Monsieur le Président, I do. I was the first to recognize him, and I stick to it. That is Jean Valjean, who came to Toulon in 1796 and went out in 1815. I went out a year later. He looks dull-witted now, but that is due to age. He looked crafty enough in prison. I positively recognize him." "You can sit down," said the judge. "The accused will remain standing." Chenildieu was then brought in. a convict under life sentence, as his red smock and green cap indicated, who had been fetched from Toulon to testify at this trial. When the judge, addressing him, asked if he still recognized the accused, he burst into laughter. "How could I help recognizing him? We did 5 years on the same chain. What's the trouble, mate? You sulking?" "Sit down," said the judge. Then came Cochepaille, also under life sentence. The judge put the same question to him, and he answered promptly. "It's Jean Valjean, all right. We used to call him Jean the Crowbar, on account of he was so strong." The judge spoke. "Prisoner at the bar, you have heard this testimony. What have you to say?" He replied, "I say it's famous." There was something like a roar from the court, in which the jury came near to joining. The case was clearly hopeless. "The ushers will call for silence," said the presiding judge. "I am about to pronounce sentence." But at this moment there was a movement from the back of the court, and a voice cried, "Brevet, Chenildieu and Cochepaille, I want you to look at me." All eyes turned in the direction of this voice, which was so grief-stricken, so terrible that it chilled the hearts of all who heard it. A man had risen to his feet and now strode to the centre of the courtroom. The presiding judge, the prosecutor, and 20 others recognized him, and exclaimed with one voice, "Monsieur Madeleine!" It was indeed he. The light from the clerk's lamp fell upon his face. He was holding his hat in his hand. His clothes were neat, his greatcoat carefully buttoned. He was very pale and trembled slightly. His hair, which had still been grey when he arrived in Arras, was now quite white. It had gone white during the hour that he had been in the courtroom. The profound sensation caused by his sudden appearance was followed by a bewildered silence. So great was the contrast between the anguish in the voice and the calm outward aspect of the man that it was hard to believe that it was he who had spoken. But the pause was only brief. Before the judge or prosecutor could speak, or any gendarme or usher make a movement, the man, who was still known to everyone as Monsieur Madeleine, advanced towards the 3 witnesses. "Do you not recognize me?" he asked. They shook their heads, staring at him in astonishment. Monsieur Madeleine turned to face the court and said quietly, "Gentlemen of the jury, you must acquit the accused. I must ask the court to order my arrest. I am the man you were looking for. I am Jean Valjean." He turned back to the 3 convicts. "I recognize you, Brevet. Do you remember—" He paused for an instant. "Do you remember the braces you used to wear with a check pattern?" Brevet gave a start of surprise and stared at him wide-eyed. Monsieur Madeleine went on, "And you, Chenildieu, you have a bad scar on your right shoulder. You held it against a hot stove, trying to burn away the letters TFP, which were branded on it, but they are still visible. Is that not so?" "It's the truth," said Chenildieu. He turned to Cochepaille. "At the bend of your left arm, Cochepaille, there's a date in blue lettering, tattooed with gunpowder. It is the date of the Emperor's landing at Cannes, 1st of March, 1815. Pull up your sleeve." Cochepaille did so. The date was there. Madeleine then turned to face the court, with a smile that still wrings the hearts of those who remember it, a smile of triumph and of utter despair. "Now do you believe that I am Jean Valjean?" That this was Jean Valjean could no longer be doubted. The truth was manifest. His pathetic appearance in itself sufficed to explain what seemed inexplicable a few moments before. without the need of further enlightenment, every person in that assembly, as though by an electric impulse, instantly perceived the simple nobility of this action, on the part of a man who was surrendering himself in order that another might not suffer in his place. Before this overwhelming fact, all lesser questions were set aside. "I will trouble the court no further," said Jean Valjean. "If I am not to be arrested at once, I will leave. I have things to attend to. The court knows who I am and where I am going, and can send for me when it chooses." He turned towards the door. No voice was raised, no arm outstretched to stay him. They stood aside to let him pass. Day was beginning to break. Fantine, after a restless night, but one filled with happy anticipation, had at length fallen asleep, and Sister Simplice had taken advantage of the fact to leave her bedside in order to prepare a new draught of quinine. She was bent over the array of bottles in the dispensary, obliged to peer closely at them in the misty dawn light, when suddenly she turned and uttered an exclamation. Monsieur Madeleine had silently entered the room. "Monsieur le Maire," he said in a low voice. "How is she?" "She seems better at the moment, but we've been very worried about her." Sister Simplice told him that Fantine had seemed to be sinking the day before, but had recovered when she came to believe that he had gone to Montfermeil to fetch her child. She did not venture to question the mayor, but she saw from his expression that this was not the case. "I am glad," he said. "You were right not to undeceive her." "Perhaps so," said the sister. "But what are we to say to her now that you have come back without the child?" He stood considering. "God will guide me," he said. The light was growing, and his face was more plainly visible. She looked at him suddenly and exclaimed, "My soul in heaven, Monsieur le Maire, what has happened to you? Your hair is quite white." White? The sister's heart was chilled with the apprehension of events unknown to her. For some time Monsieur Madeleine stayed motionless at Fantine's bedside, looking from the sick woman to the crucifix above her head. The sister had not come in with him. Presently Fantine opened her eyes, looked up at him, and said tranquilly, with a smile, "And Cosette?" He murmured something in reply, and afterwards could not remember what he had said. Fortunately the doctor had been summoned, and now came to his rescue. "You must keep calm, my child," he said. "Your little girl is here." Fantine's eyes shone with a brilliance that lighted all her face. She clasped her hands in a gesture expressing all that is most passionate and most humble in the act of prayer. "Oh," she cried, "won't someone bring her in?" With the touching self-deception of a mother, she still thought of Cosette as a babe in arms. "Not yet," said the doctor. "Not for the present. You are still feverish, and the excitement would be bad for you. First you must get well." "But I am well. I'm perfectly well. How can you be so foolish? I want to see my baby." "You see how quickly you become agitated," the doctor said. "So long as you are in this state, I cannot let you have your child. It is not enough to see her. You have to live for her. When you are calmer, I will bring her to you myself." She hung her head. "I beg your pardon, Monsieur le Médecin." Madeleine had seated himself on a chair by the bed. She turned towards him, making a palpable effort to appear calm. "Did you think her pretty, Monsieur le Maire? She's beautiful, isn't she?" He took her hand. "Cosette is beautiful," he said. She's well, and you will soon see her. But now you must rest." Monsieur Madeleine was still holding her hand while he gazed anxiously at her. There were things he had intended to say, but now he hesitated. The doctor had left, and only Sister Simplice remained with them. The silence that ensued was broken suddenly by a cry from Fantine. "I can hear her! My darling, I can hear her!" A child was playing in the yard, the daughter perhaps of one of the women who worked there. "It's Cosette!" cried Fantine. "I recognize her voice. Suddenly she broke off, and her abrupt silence caused Madeleine to look at her. Her aspect was alarming. She seemed scarcely to breathe. She had raised herself on her elbows, with one thin shoulder emerging from her nightgown. Her face, which a minute before had been radiant, was now white, and she was staring with wide, startled eyes at some terrifying sight that it seemed had just appeared at the far end of the room. "What is it, Fantine? What's the matter?" She did not answer, but still staring, touched him on the arm, while with her other hand she pointed behind him. Madeleine turned and saw Javert. In the moment when the eyes of the two men met, Javert, without having moved or made the least gesture, became hideous. No human emotion can wear an aspect so terrible as that of jubilation. He had the face of a fiend who has found the victim he thought he had lost. Fantine had not set eyes on Javert since the day when the mayor had rescued her from him. Her sick mind understood nothing, but she did not doubt that he had come on her account. The sight of him was like a foretaste of death, and she hid her face in her hands and cried, "Monsieur Madeleine, save me!" Jean Valjean, we shall henceforth call him by no other name, had risen to his feet. He said in the calmest of voices, "Don't be afraid. He hasn't come for you." And to Javert he said, "I know what you're here for." Javert seized the mayor by the collar. "Monsieur le Maire!" cried Fantine. Javert uttered a hideous laugh, baring all his teeth. "He isn't mayor any longer." Fantine sat upright, supporting herself on her rigid arms. Her eyes travelled from Valjean to Javert, and then to the nun. She seemed about to speak, but only a whimper issued from her lips, while her teeth chattered. She reached out her arms in a gesture of anguish, and with open hands groped like a person in the act of drowning, and suddenly she fell back against the pillow. She was dead. Jean Valjean seized the hand gripping his collar, and detached it, as effortlessly as if it had been that of a child. He said to Javert, "You have killed that woman." "That'll do," Javert cried furiously. "I didn't come here to argue. We wasted enough time. The escort's waiting below. March, or I'll put the handcuffs on you." Javert consigned Jean Valjean to the town lock-up. The arrest of Monsieur Madeleine created a sensation in Montreuil, indeed an extraordinary commotion. It is sad to have to recall that at the mention of the word felon, nearly everyone deserted him. In a matter of hours, all the good he had done was forgotten, and he was simply the ex-convict. Only 3 or 4 persons in the whole town remained faithful to his memory, among them the old concierge who had served him. On the evening of that day, the devoted creature was seated in her porter's lodge, still bewildered and sadly pondering. The factory had been closed all day. The doors were bolted and the street deserted. There was no one on the premises but the 2 nuns, Sister Perpetua and Sister Simplice, who were keeping vigil at Fantine's bedside. At the time when Monsieur Madeleine was accustomed to come, the old woman got his key out of a drawer and made ready the taper in a stand which he used to light his way upstairs. She hung the key on the hook where he was accustomed to look for it, and placed the taper beside it, as though she were expecting him. Then she returned to her chair and her unhappy thoughts, having acted from force of habit, unconscious of what she was doing. It was not until an hour or 2 later that she suddenly exclaimed, Bless my soul, I've put his things ready for him. At this moment the window of her pigeonhole was opened, and a hand reached for the key. She stared at the hand, stifling the cry that rose to her lips. The hand and coat sleeve were unmistakably those of Monsieur Madeleine. For a moment she couldn't speak, but then she cried, "God forgive me, Monsieur le Maire. I thought you were—" She could not finish the sentence, and he did so for her. "You thought I was in prison. So I was. I broke a window bar, dropped down from the roof, and here I am. I'm going up to my room. Will you please fetch Sister Simplice? No doubt she's in the infirmary." The old woman hurried off. He had uttered no word of warning, knowing that she would never betray him. He climbed the stairs leading to his room. He got an old shirt out of a drawer and tore it into strips, in which he wrapped the 2 silver candlesticks that had belonged to the Bishop of Digne. He did all this without haste or agitation, gnawing meanwhile at a hunk of black bread, presumably prison bread, which he had brought with him. There was a soft knock at the door, and Sister Simplice entered. She was pale and red-eyed, and the candle she carried was shaking in her hand. Jean Valjean had written a note. He handed it to her unfolded, and said, "I should be grateful, sister, if you would give this to the curé. You can read it." She read, "I would ask Monsieur le Curé to take charge of the money I am leaving here. He is to use it to pay the costs of my trial and the funeral expenses of the woman who died today. The rest is for the poor." The sister tried to speak, but could do little more than stammer a few words. She did, however, manage to ask if he would like to see the dead woman for the last time. "No, they're after me. They might arrest me at her bedside, and that would disturb her peace." He had scarcely finished speaking when they heard sounds from below. They heard a tramping of feet, and, mingled with it, the voice of a servant loudly protesting. "I swear to you by God, monsieur, that I've been here all day and all this evening, and that I've seen no one enter." A man said, "But there's a light in his room." They recognized the voice of Javert. The room was so arranged that the door, when it was fully open, masked one corner. Jean Valjean blew out his light and slipped into this hiding-place. Sister Simplice went on her knees at the table. The door opened, and Javert entered. There was a murmur of men's voices from the corridor, and the voice of the servant still raised in protest. The sister did not look up. She was praying. Her candle, standing on the mantelpiece, gave only a dim light. At the sight of her, Javert stood abashed. Seeing the sister, his first impulse was to withdraw, but on the other hand he had a duty to perform, which also admitted of no denial. So on second thoughts he stayed, resolved to hazard at least one question. There knelt Sister Simplice, who in all her life had never told a lie. Javert knew this, and held her in special veneration because of it. "Sister," he asked, "are you the only person in this room?" There ensued a terrible moment. The sister looked up. "Yes," she said. "Forgive me," said Javert, "if I ask you one thing more. Have you seen anyone this evening? A man. He has escaped from the prison, and we are searching for him. The man called Valjean. Have you seen him?" "No," replied the sister. She had lied twice, promptly and without hesitation, in an act of sacrifice. "I apologize," said Javert, and bowed deeply. He withdrew. An hour later, a man on foot might have been seen among the trees and mists, heading rapidly away from Montreuil-sur-Mer in the direction of Paris. It was Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean had been recaptured. A few months after his imprisonment, the following passage appeared in a local newspaper. 17th of November, 1823. Yesterday, a convict working aboard the prison ship Orion fell into the sea and was drowned after rescuing a member of the crew. The body has not been recovered. It is assumed that it was caught in the piles under the Arsenal jetty. The man's prison registration number was 9430, and his name was Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean had not died by drowning, as was supposed. When he had flung himself into the sea, he had swum under water to a moored vessel, to which a boat was tied, and had hidden in the boat until nightfall. After dark, he had taken to the sea again, and swum along the coast to a place a short distance from Cap Brun. Here, since he did not lack money, he was able to buy clothes. Thereafter, like all fugitives seeking to escape the vigilance of the law and social mischance, Valjean had travelled a dark and circuitous road. It was a furtive, mole-like journey, of which all the twists and turns were not known. He was still believed to be dead, and this was his greatest safeguard. Reading the report in a newspaper, he felt reassured, and almost at peace, as though he had really died. He then went to Montfermeil to obtain custody of Cosette from the Thénardier. He presented them with a letter written by Fantine, along with the money it promised them. The letter instructed the Thénardier to hand Cosette over to the bearer, and so, grudgingly, they did. Thus Cosette began a new life with Valjean, the escaped convict, whom she grew to call father. But Valjean, who established new identities for them both, never allowed his vigilance to relax. The authorities might well think him dead, but he knew that his mortal enemy, Javert, would not be so easily convinced without seeing his dead body for himself. Javert, he knew, would never give up the hunt, and so Valjean kept vigil. Valjean discovered a suitable house in the city with a wild garden, and henceforth went by the name of Fauchelevent. But at the same time he rented 2 other apartments in Paris, partly so that he might not attract attention by always remaining in the same quarter, but also so as to have a place of retreat if he should need one, and above all, not to be taken at a loss should he ever be discovered by Javert. It was now 1832, and Cosette had grown from a girl into a young woman. Because of Valjean's erratic comings and goings, Cosette was left to her own devices for much of the time. Often she would stroll in the garden. There was an old stone bench in one corner, 1 or 2 lichen-covered statues, and a few remains of trellis work. Sometimes she would sit on this bench and await a person whose existence to Valjean was entirely unknown. During the month of May in the year 1832, in that wild garden with its dense tangle of undergrowth, which grew daily more impenetrable and richly scented, 2 beings, composed wholly of chastity and innocence, bathed in all the felicities under heaven, nearer to the angels than to men, pure, truthful, intoxicated and enraptured, shone for each other in the gloom. To Cosette it seemed that Marius, the young man of whom we speak, wore a crown, and to Marius, Cosette wore a halo. They existed in that state of ravishment which might be termed the enchantment of one soul by another, the ineffable first encounter of 2 virgin spirits in an idyllic world. They had told each other as much about themselves as they could, but it did not go very far beyond their names. Marius had told Cosette that he was an orphan, that his name was Marius Pontmercy, and that he got his meagre living by working for publishers, that his late father had been a colonel and a hero, and that he, Marius, had quarrelled with his rich grandfather, and was estranged from him. He had also mentioned in passing that he was a baron, but this had made no impression on Cosette. Marius was a baron? She had not understood, not knowing what the word meant. Marius was Marius. And on her side, she had told him that she had been brought up in a convent, that her mother was dead, like his own, that her father was Monsieur Fauchelevent, that he was a good man who gave generously to the poor, although he was poor himself, and that he denied himself everything, while denying her nothing. Jean Valjean, meanwhile, suspected nothing. Cosette was happy, and that was enough to make him happy. Since Valjean always went to bed at 10, Marius never entered the garden until later that hour, and after hearing Cosette open the door onto the terrace. It goes without saying that Marius never showed himself by daytime. But it happened one morning that Valjean remarked to Cosette, "Your back's all white." The evening before, Marius, in a moment of rapture, had pressed her against the wall. Old Toussaint, the housekeeper, who went to bed early and only wanted to sleep once her work was done, was as ignorant as Valjean of what was going on. The 3rd of June, 1832, is a date which must be set down because of the grave events now impending, that loomed like thunderclouds over Paris. Marius, that evening, was with Cosette, but he had found her unhappy. His first words to her were, "What's the matter?" And seated beside him on their bench, she told him of her troubles. "My father has said this morning that I must be ready to go. He has business to attend to, and we may have to leave this place." Marius trembled. "Father said that he had to go on a journey, and that we would go together. He would give me his clothes to pack, and I must see to everything. A big trunk for me, and a little one for him. They must all be ready within a week. And perhaps we should be going to England. If we go, you must come too. I'll tell you where, and you must meet me there, wherever it is." "How can I possibly do that?" he cried. "Are you crazy? It takes money to go to England, and I haven't any. You only see me by night. If you saw me by daylight, you'd think me a beggar. England? I can't even afford a passport." He took her hand. "Now listen," he continued. "Don't expect me here tomorrow." "But why?" "You'll see. I know of only one way whereby I might obtain some money." And Marius murmured, half to himself, "He won't change his habits. He never sees anyone except in the evening." "What are you talking about?" asked Cosette. "Never mind." "But what are you going to do?" "Wait until the day after tomorrow." "Oh, must I really?" "Yes, Cosette." She took his head in her hands and sought to read his secret in his eyes. "While I think of it," said Marius, "you must have my address in case you need it. I'm living with a friend of mine, Courfeyrac." He got a penknife out of his pocket and scratched the address on the plaster of the wall. 16 Rue de la Verrerie. Cosette was intently watching him. "Tell me what you're thinking, Marius. Tell me what it is, or how shall I sleep tonight?" "I'm thinking this, that God can't possibly mean us to be separated. I shall be here the evening after tomorrow." But what am I to do until then? It's all very well for you. You'll be out and about, you'll be doing things. Men are so lucky. But I shall be all alone. I shall be so wretched. Where are you going tomorrow evening?" "I'm going to try something." And without further speech, Marius left. Marius's estranged grandfather, Monsieur Gillenormand, had now passed his 91st year. For years he had sturdily, that is the right word, awaited Marius's return, convinced that sooner or later the young scamp would knock at his door. But now there were melancholy moments when he reflected that if the boy did not come soon, it was not the approach of death that he found unbearable, but the thought that he might never see Marius again. And so it was on the evening of the 4th of June, 1832, while this mood was on him, his old manservant, Basque, entered the room and asked, "Will Monsieur receive Monsieur Marius?" Monsieur Gillenormand started upright, ashen-faced, and looking like a corpse revived by a galvanic shock. He stammered, "Show him in." He waited quivering, with his eyes fixed on the door, until at length it opened and Marius entered. He stood uncertainly in the doorway, as though waiting to be invited in. The shabbiness of his clothes was not apparent in the half-darkness of the room. Nothing of him was clearly visible but his face, which was calm and grave, but strangely sad. Monsieur Gillenormand wanted to open his arms and summon him to his embrace. His whole being cried out to him, but this surge of feeling found expression in words, springing from the harsh underside of his nature, and he only asked abruptly, "What have you come for?" Marius murmured in embarrassment, "Monsieur, I know that I'm not welcome here. I have come to ask for only one thing, and then I'll go away at once." "Well, let's get to the point. You say you've come to ask for something. What is it?" "Monsieur," said Marius, with the expression of a man about to jump off a precipice, "I have come to ask your consent as my legal guardian to my marriage." The terse, harsh tone of the old man's utterance conveyed a strange fullness of emotion. "You want to get married? At the age of 21? You've arranged it all except for one trifling formality, my consent. Please be seated, monsieur. Would it be indiscreet to ask to whom?" The old man paused, but before Marius could reply, he burst out, "I suppose you've got some sort of position. Perhaps you've made a fortune. What do you earn as a lawyer?" "Nothing," said Marius. "Nothing? So all you have to live on are the 1,200 livres I allow you?" Marius made no reply. Monsieur Gillenormand went on. "Well then, I take it the girl is rich?" "No richer than I am." "You mean she won't have a dowry?" "No." "Expectations?" "I think not." "Not a rag to her back? And what does her father do?" "I don't know." "Well, what's her name?" "Mademoiselle Fauchelevent." "Fauchelevent? What?" "Fauchelevent." "Pfff!" said the old man. "Monsieur," cried Marius, in the distraction of seeing his last hope vanish, "I beg of you, I beseech you in heaven's name, on my bended knees, to allow me to marry her." "The answer is never." "Grandfather—" "Never." The tone in which the word was uttered robbed Marius of all hope. He rose and crossed the room slowly, swaying a little, with his head bowed like someone in the act of dying, and left. When Marius returned home from his disastrous visit to his grandfather, he found this note waiting for him at his lodgings. "My dearest Marius, alas, father insists that we must leave here at once. We go tonight to our apartment at number 7 Rue de l'Homme Armé, and in a week we shall be in England. Cosette, 4th of June. This, to Marius, was the mortal blow. After reading Cosette's letter, Marius went in the dusk to join the barricade on the Rue de la Chanvrerie. He wished to die, and here was the means. At about 4 o'clock on the afternoon of that same day, Jean Valjean had been seated alone on the shady side of one of the more isolated streets of the city. Paris was in an unsettled state, and for anyone with something to hide, the present political unrest had the disadvantage that the police had become more than usually obtrusive, and might, in their search for agitators, light upon someone like Jean Valjean. These considerations troubled him, and something else had occurred to add to his unease, an unaccountable circumstance, of which he had become aware only that morning. Rising early before Cosette's shutters were open, he had gone out into the garden, and had suddenly noticed an address scratched on the wall, 16 Rue de la Verrerie. It was evidently recent. The letters stood out white against the dingy plaster. It might well have been done the previous night. Was it intended as a message for some third party? Or was it a warning to himself? He pondered these matters, but said nothing to Cosette, not wishing to alarm her. The upshot was that after due consideration, Jean Valjean had decided to leave Paris, and even France, and go to England. During that afternoon, a strange commotion could be heard coming from the heart of the city, sounds that resembled rifle fire, and the clamour of a vast crowd. The people were rioting. How will history assess the events of June 1832? They were an insurrection. In its rapid explosion and melancholy suppression, the outburst of 1832 was possessed of such nobility that none who regarded it can talk of it without respect. Confined within the bounds of this story, we shall deal with only one aspect and one incident, certainly the least known of the events of the 5th and 6th of June, 1832. But we shall do it in such a manner as to enable us to catch a glimpse behind the dark curtain that we shall raise, of the true face of that terrible occurrence. By the spring of 1832, Paris was like a loaded gun, needing only a spark to set it off. The spark in June 1832 was the death of General Lamarque. Lamarque was a man of action and high repute. He had been one of Napoleon's marshals. The treaties of 1815 had outraged him like a personal affront. He detested Wellington with a forthright hatred that pleased the masses, and for 17 years, taking little note of subsequent events, Lamarque had mourned the tragedy of Waterloo. On his deathbed, he had pressed to his heart the sword bestowed on him by his fellow officers of the 100 Days, and he had died with the word patrie on his lips, as Napoleon had died with the word armée on his. His death was a day of national mourning, and like all other bitterness, mourning may be transformed into revolt. That is what happened. On the eve of the 5th of June, the day fixed for Lamarque's funeral, and on the morning of that day, the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, through which the funeral procession was to pass, assumed a formidable aspect. Men were arming themselves with whatever they could lay hands on. Consequently, authority was on the alert, with a hand on its sword hilt. The hearse passed the Bastille, and following the canal, crossed the bridge of Austerlitz. Here it paused. Meanwhile, a detachment of the municipal cavalry had appeared and were barring the exit from the bridge, while on the other bank a detachment of dragoons moved along. The young men dragging the hearse saw these as they passed onto the quay and cried, "Watch out! Dragoons!" The dragoons advanced grimly and purposefully at a walking pace and in silence, sabres, sheaths, and pistols in their holsters, muskets in their rests. 200 paces from the little bridge they halted. The hearse was moving towards them. They parted their ranks to let it through, and then closed up behind it. At that moment the dragoons and the crowd were in direct contact. The women ran away in terror. What happened in that fateful minute? No one will ever know. It was the dark moment when two crowds converge. Some people say that a bugle call sounding the charge was heard from the direction of the arsenal. Others that a youth attacked one of the dragoons with a dagger. The tempest was unleashed. Stones fell like hail, volleys were fired, and a mass of people rushed to the river. A makeshift barricade was erected, while sounds of war echoed to the four corners of Paris. The cry, "To arms!" rang out, and there were clashes everywhere. Fury fanned the uprising as the wind fans a forest fire. That evening the theatres did not open. The police patrols were evidently on edge, searching pedestrians and arresting suspects. By 9 o'clock more than 800 persons had been arrested, and the prisons were full to bursting point. People were barricading their houses, while wives and mothers waited anxiously for men who did not come home. Occasionally there was a distant rumble of cartwheels, and doorways echoed with a subdued tumult of voices, reporting the latest developments. Doors were hastily bolted, while householders asked each other, "Where will it end?" With every minute that passed, Paris in the gathering dusk seemed more and more ominously tinged with the red glow of revolution. Marius reached Les Halles. He entered the Rue de la Chanvrerie without being seen by the rebel sentry who was at the far end. Feeling himself to be near his destination, he walked on with extreme caution. Reaching the corner, he peered into the alleyway past the house on his left. Himself hidden in the shadow of the house, he saw reflected on the cobbles a faint glow coming from a small flickering light, on top of what looked like a crudely constructed wall adjoining the tavern building, of which he could see a part, and, crouched in front of it, a number of men with muskets on their knees. This, within 20 yards from him, was the interior of the stronghold. The houses on his right hid the rest of the tavern, the larger barricade, and the flag. Trembling but resolute, Marius entered the stronghold. His gaze travelled over the interior of the barricade. The rebels were talking in low voices, not moving, and one could feel the unreal silence which denotes the last stage of expectancy. Without ceremony, they welcomed Marius as one of their own. Jean Valjean, at that moment, was in a state of appalling shock, with all his worst terrors realized. Like Paris itself, he was trembling on the verge of a revolution that was both formidable and deep-seated. On the evening of that 5th of June, Valjean, with Cosette and Toussaint, had removed to their apartment on the Rue de l'Homme Armé, and it was here that the unforeseen awaited him. Cosette had not left the house on the Rue Plumet without protest. For the first time in their life together, her wishes and those of Jean Valjean had shown themselves to be separate matters, which, if not wholly opposed, were at least contradictory. They had arrived in tight-lipped silence at the Rue de l'Homme Armé, each concerned with a personal problem. Valjean so perturbed that he did not perceive Cosette's distress, and Cosette so unhappy that she failed to discern his state of alarm. Saying that she had a headache, Cosette bid her father good night and went to her bedroom. Valjean sat with his elbows on the table, mentally planning their journey to England, endowing it with every imaginable comfort, and in his daydream saw his happiness reborn, no matter where they were. But as he paced slowly up and down the room, something suddenly caught his eye. He came face to face with the mirror, hanging at an inclined angle over the sideboard, and, reflected in it, he read the following lines. My dearest Marius, alas, father insists that we must leave here at once. We go tonight to number 7 Rue de l'Homme Armé, and in a week we shall be in England. Cosette, 4th of June. Jean Valjean stood aghast. Cosette, when they had arrived, had put her blotting-book on the dresser, and in her distress had forgotten to remove it, leaving it open at the page on which she had blotted her letter to Marius. And the mirror, reflecting the reverse handwriting, had made it clearly legible. It was simple, and it was devastating. Valjean trembled and sank into the armchair. He said to himself that there was no escape. The light of his world had gone out since Cosette had written this to someone other than himself. But then he heard his own spirit become again terrible, roar solemnly in the darkness. Try to rob a lion of its cub. Until that moment, no trial had been too much for Jean Valjean, but anyone able to see into his heart would have been forced to admit that now he had been weakened. While he sat brooding, Toussaint entered the room. Valjean turned to her and asked, Where is it happening? The fighting. Do you know? It's near Les Halles, said Toussaint. Darkness had fallen. Valjean began to walk instinctively towards the address he had already seen etched on his own garden wall. When he arrived at the house in the Rue de la Verrerie, Jean Valjean asked to see the young man named Marius. When told that Marius had gone to the barricade to join the fighting, Valjean's fevered mind made calculations. He felt that he was saved. Once again he would have Cosette to himself without any rival, and their life together would continue as before. Cosette would never know what had happened to that other man. I've only to let things take their course. There's no escape for the youth. If he's not yet dead, he will certainly die. But having assured himself of this, Valjean's gloom returned, and presently he walked back to his own house. About an hour later he left the house again with a loaded musket and a pouch filled with cartridges, and set off for Les Halles. The barricade in the Rue de la Chanvrerie was impressive. Iron bars projected from between the paving stones like couched lances. There was an area within the barricade, the ground-floor room of the tavern and the kitchen, converted into a first-aid post, where all wounds were dressed. Bullets had been cast and cartridges made. The weapons of the fallen had been redistributed, and the bodies of the dead removed. They were heaped in an alleyway commanded by the rebels, of which the pavement had long been red with blood. Early in the first day of fighting, the rebels had caught a police spy. This prize captive was bound and gagged, and tied to a pillar inside the barricade. The rebels had condemned him to death. At the first lull in the fighting, they intended to kill him. Dawn was beginning to show, and the torch had been extinguished. The interior of the stronghold was still in shadow, and in that vaguely ominous first light, it resembled the deck of a ship in distress. When Valjean entered the barricade, the first face he saw amongst the many inside that fateful place was that of his ancient enemy, Javert. It was he whom the rebels had captured as a police spy. The rebel leader saw the newcomer standing in the doorway. Looking round, Marius recognized Cosette's father. "Who's this man?" demanded the rebel leader. Marius said authoritatively, "I know him." The leader turned to Jean Valjean. "If our new friend Marius knows you, that's good enough for me. Citizen, you're welcome." And he added, "You know that we are about to die." Valjean made no reply. We must describe what was going on in Marius's mind. He no longer grasped things clearly. He felt that without Cosette he was already in the grave, that he had crossed over to the other side, whence he could see the faces of the living only with the eyes of the dead. How did Monsieur Fauchelevent come to be here? Why was he here? What had he come for? The thought of Cosette clutched at his heart. Monsieur Fauchelevent did not speak to Marius or even look at him, and seemed not to have heard what Marius said. This was a relief to Marius, and indeed, if the word can be used in such a context, it may be said to have pleased him. He had always been conscious of the impossibility of his addressing a word to this enigmatic figure, who was to him both suspect and impressive. The rebel leader turned to the man condemned to death. He asked, "Do you want anything?" Javert replied, "When are you going to kill me?" "You must wait. At the moment we need all our ammunition." "Then give me something to drink," said Javert. The rebel brought him a glass of water, and, since his arms were bound, held it for him to drink. "Is that all?" he asked. "I'm not comfortable," said Javert. "It was scarcely kind to keep me lashed to this pillar all night." At their leader's order, 4 of the rebels released Javert from the pillar, a 5th holding a bayonet to his breast while they were untying him. To render any attempt of escape impossible, they passed a rope round his neck, ran the 2 ends between his legs, and tied them to his wrists, the device known in prisons as the martingale. While they were doing this, Javert looked round and recognized Jean Valjean. He gave no sign of emotion. Coolly averting his gaze, he simply said, "So, here we are." It was daybreak. The silence in the direction from which the main attack was to be expected was now so ominous that the rebel leader sent all his men to their action stations, and a ration of brandy was distributed. Silence fell, broken only by a series of clicks along the wall as the men cocked their muskets. All eyes widened as the defenders stared through the barricade. The attackers began their fire, alternating musketry with grape shot, but it must be said without doing any great damage. In general, this is a tactic commonly used in attacking a street barricade. A steady fire is kept up to draw the fire of the insurgents, if they are so foolish as to return it. When they are seen to be running out of powder and shot, the assault goes in, but the rebels had not fallen into this trap. The fire was not returned. The leader turned to Javert. "I haven't forgotten you," he said. Putting a pistol on the table, he went on, "The last man to leave this place will blow out this spy's brains." "Here?" someone asked. "No. We don't want his body to be mixed up with our own. He's to be taken outside and executed." At this point, Jean Valjean intervened. He said to the man, "You're the leader, are you not?" "Yes." "Then I will ask you for one favor." "What is it?" "That I may be allowed to blow that man's brains out." Javert looked up, and seeing Valjean, made a slight movement of his head. "Why not?" said the leader, as he reloaded his carbine. He looked about him and asked, "Does anyone object?" There was silence, and he turned to Valjean. "All right, you can have the spy." Valjean took possession of Javert by seating himself on the end of the table. He picked up the pistol, and the sound of a click indicated that he'd cocked it. But at almost the same instant was a sound of trumpets. "On guard!" cried Marius from the top of the barricade. "Everybody out!" cried the rebel leader. When Jean Valjean was alone with Javert, he signed him to stand up. Javert obeyed. Valjean led him out of the tavern, but slowly, because Javert, his legs stiff, could walk only with difficulty. Valjean had the pistol in his other hand. Thus they crossed the interior of the stronghold, while its defenders, intent upon the coming attack, had their backs to them. Only Marius at the end of the barricade saw them pass, and that sinister pair, victim and executioner, reflected the sense of doom in his own spirit. Jean Valjean, with some difficulty, helped Javert, bound as he was, over the barricade. Having done so, they were in the narrow alleyway, where the corner of the house hid them from the insurgents. The dead bodies dragged off the barricade formed a dreadful heap a few paces away. Javert glanced sidelong at the bodies, and murmured in a voice of profound calm, "Take your revenge." Valjean got a clasp knife out of his pocket and opened it. "A knife thrust?" exclaimed Javert. "You're quite right. That suits you better." Jean Valjean cut the halter round Javert's neck, then the ropes binding his wrists and ankles. Then, standing upright, he said, "You're free to go." Javert was not easily taken aback, but with all his self-discipline, he could not conceal his amazement. He stared, open-mouthed. "I don't suppose I shall leave here alive," Valjean went on. "But if I do, I'm lodging at number 7 Rue de l'Homme Armé, under the name of Fauchelevent." A swift, tigerish grimace curled the corner of Javert's lip. "Now go," said Jean Valjean. Javert straightened his shoulders, turned, and marched off in the direction of Les Halles. When Javert had vanished from sight, Valjean fired the pistol into the air. Then he went back into the stronghold and said, "It's done." The death throes of the stronghold were about to begin. Suddenly a drum beat the charge. The attack was a hurricane. Ferocity was now allied to skill. A powerful column of infantry and municipal guards advanced at the double down the street, drums playing and trumpets sounding, bayonets fixed, and flung itself upon the barricade with the weight of a metal battering ram against a wall. Determination was equal on either side. Bravery became almost barbarous, and to it was added a sort of heroic ferocity, beginning with the sacrifice of self. The troops wanted it over with. The rebels wanted to fight. Everyone in that melee was filled with the inspiration of a supreme moment. The street was littered with bodies. The assaults continued one after another. The horror was steadily growing. They fought body to body, hand to the last, with pistol shots, sabre thrusts, bare fists, from above and below, from all quarters, the roof of the house, the windows of the tavern, even the vent holes of the cellars into which some had slid. Marius was still fighting. Though many were now killed, he was so covered with wounds, particularly on the head, that his face was smothered with blood, as though he had a red scarf tied round it. The rebel leader alone was unscathed. Then the supreme assault was launched, and this time it succeeded. This time all was over. The group of rebels beat a hasty retreat. Yet Marius had stayed on the top of the barricade throughout. A bullet had shattered his shoulder-blade. He felt himself grow dizzy, and he fell. At this moment, when his eyes were already closed, he felt himself grasped by a vigorous hand, and in the moment before he sank into unconsciousness, he had just time to think, mingled with the memory of Cosette, "I'm taken prisoner. I shall be shot." Marius was indeed a prisoner, and of Jean Valjean. It was Valjean's hand that had grasped him as he fell, and his grip he had felt before losing consciousness. Valjean had taken no part in the battle, other than in exposing himself to it. Had it not been for him, no one in those last desperate moments would have thought of the wounded. Thanks to him, those who fell were picked up, carried into the tavern, and their wounds dressed. In the interval he mended the barricade, but he did not strike a blow, even in self-defence. He silently assisted, and as it happened, he had scarcely a scratch. The bullets would have none of him. When a bullet laid Marius low, Valjean leapt forward with the agility of a tiger, seized him as though he were his prey, and carried him off. No one saw Valjean carry Marius's unconscious form across the stronghold and vanish round the corner of the house. Here Jean Valjean stopped, lowered Marius to the ground, and with his back to the wall, stood looking about him. The situation was appalling. For perhaps 2 or 3 minutes this corner of wall might afford them shelter. But how do you escape from the inferno? It was a situation such as only a bird could have escaped from. Valjean looked at the house opposite, at the barricade, and then at the ground with the intentness of utmost extremity, as though he was seeking to dig a hole in it with his eyes. As he looked, something like a possibility emerged, as though the very intensity of his gaze had brought it to light. He saw a few feet away, at the foot of the rigorously guarded lower barricade, half hidden by tumbled paving stones, an iron grille let into the street. Made of stout iron transverse bars, it was about 2 feet square. The stones surrounding it had been uprooted, so that it was, as it were, unsealed. Beneath the bars was a dark aperture, something like a chimney flue. Valjean leapt forward, all his old experience of escape springing like inspiration into his mind. To shift the paving stones, raise the grille, lift Marius's inert body onto his shoulder, and charge with this burden using elbows and knees, to climb down into this fortunately shallow well, to let the heavy grille fall shut behind him, over which the stones again tumbled, and find footing on a tiled surface some 10 feet underground. All this was done as though in delirium, with immense strength and hawk-like speed. It took only a few minutes. Valjean, with a still unconscious Marius, found himself in a long subterranean passage, a place of absolute peace, silence, and darkness. Jean Valjean was in the Paris sewer. The change was unbelievable. In the very heart of the town, Valjean had left the town. In a matter of moments, the time to lift the lid and let it fall, he had passed from daylight into total darkness, from midday to midnight, from tumult to silence, and the stillness of the tomb, and, by a mere chance, from utmost peril to absolute safety. He stayed for some moments, listening, as though in a stupor. Meanwhile, the injured man did not move, and Valjean did not know whether his burden was living or dead. His first sensation was one of utter blindness. He could see nothing. After some moments, as his eyes became adjusted, he began to see by the dim light a hatchway by which he had entered. Bending over the unconscious form in that dim light, Valjean stared at him with inexpressible hatred. He found two objects in Marius's clothing, a piece of bread left from the day before, and his wallet. He ate the bread, and, opening the wallet, found a note, evidently anticipating his death. Marius had written, "My name is Marius Pontmercy. My body is to be taken to the house of my grandfather, Monsieur Gillenormand, 6 Rue des Filles du Calvaire, in the Marais." Valjean pored over the message, memorizing the address. Then he replaced the wallet in Marius's pocket. By sheer force of will over his exhausted muscles, Valjean carried Marius to an outlet of the main part of the sewer, which gave out onto the open banks of the Seine. Here he laid Marius on the ground. He was outside. Night was falling. The sky offered a prospect of immense calm. The river lapped at his feet with the sound of a kiss, and a few stars faintly showed in the deepening blue of the sky. Valjean bent over Marius and sprinkled a few drops of water on his face from the river. Marius's eyelids did not move, but his open mouth still breathed. Valjean was again about to dip his hand in the water, when he had that familiar sense of someone behind him. He looked sharply round. A man in a long coat, with folded arms and a cudgel in his right hand, was standing a few paces away. In the half-darkness, it seemed a spectral figure, but Valjean recognized Javert. Javert, however, did not at first recognize Valjean. He was there by chance, contemplating the troubled waters of the river, as if they reflected his own troubled soul. "Who are you?" Javert asked. "Myself." "Who is that?" "Jean Valjean." Javert leaned forwards and clapped his hands on Valjean's shoulders, seizing them in a vice-like grip. Staring hard, he recognized him. Their faces were nearly touching. Javert's gaze was terrible. Jean Valjean stayed unresisting, like a lion consenting to the clutch of a lynx. "Inspector Javert," Valjean said, "you have me. In any case, since this morning I have considered myself your prisoner. I did not give you my address in order to escape from you, but grant me one thing. Help me deliver this young man to the house of his grandfather, where his life may be saved." It was quite dark when they reached 6 Rue des Filles du Calvaire. Javert got out first, and raising a heavy iron knocker, knocked loudly. The door opened to disclose a yawning porter with a candle. Javert gave his credentials and questioned the porter in a brusque official tone. "Anyone live here called Gillenormand?" "Yes. What do you want of him?" "We are bringing back his grandson," said Javert. "He was at the barricade. He got himself wounded. Quick, carry him inside." Marius was taken up to the first floor, and a man was sent in search of a doctor. Valjean felt Javert's hand on his arm. He understood. They got back into the carriage, and the driver climbed onto his seat. "Inspector, grant me one last favor." "What is it?" "Let me go home for a minute. After that you can do what you like with me." Javert was silent for some moments, his chin sunk in the deep collar of his greatcoat. Then he pulled down the window in front of him. "Drive to number 7, Rue de l'Homme Armé," he said. Neither spoke a word during the journey. What did Jean Valjean wish to do? He wished to finish what he had begun. To tell Cosette the news of Marius. Give her perhaps some other useful information, and, if possible, make certain final dispositions. Where he personally was concerned, all was over. At the entrance to the Rue de l'Homme Armé, the carriage stopped, since the street was too narrow to admit vehicles. Javert and Valjean got out. They walked along the street, which, as usual, was deserted. Valjean knocked at the door in number 7, and it was opened. "Go up," said Javert. He had a strange expression, as though it cost him an effort to speak. "I'll wait for you here." Valjean entered the house and called, "It's me," to the porter, and went upstairs. On the first floor he paused. The sash window was open. Perhaps automatically or simply to draw breath, Valjean thrust out his head. He looked down into the street, which was short and lighted from end to end by its single lamp. He gave a start of amazement. There was no one there. Javert had gone. Javert had walked slowly away from the Rue de l'Homme Armé, walking for the first time in his life with his head bowed. His whole person bore the imprint of uncertainty. Walking through the silent streets, he took the shortest way back to the Seine, finally arriving near the police post in the Place du Châtelet, by the Pont Notre-Dame. What he had done made him shudder. Against all regulations, all social and legal organization, against the whole code, he, Javert, had taken it upon himself to let a prisoner go. What it all came down to was that he was guilty of an unpardonable infraction of the rules. He had let a felon go. He felt that his life was in ruins. Authority was dead within him, and he had no reason to go on living. Crossing the Place du Châtelet, he turned automatically to the river, and stood leaning with his elbows on the parapet. It was the sepulchral moment that succeeds midnight, with the stars hidden by cloud, and not a light to be seen in the houses of the city, not a passer-by, only the faint, distant gleam of a street lamp, and the shadowy outlines of Notre-Dame and the Palais de Justice. The place where Javert stood was where the river flows in a dangerous rapid. He looked down. There was a sound of running water, but the river itself was not to be seen. What lay below him was a void, so that he might have been standing on the edge of infinity. He stayed motionless for some minutes, staring into nothingness. Abruptly, he took off his hat and laid it on the parapet. A moment later, a dark figure, which a passer-by might have taken for a ghost, stood upright on the parapet. It leaned forward and dropped into the darkness. There was a splash, and that was all. Marius lay for a long time between life and death, in a state of fever and delirium, endlessly repeating the name of Cosette. His grandfather, Monsieur Gillenormand, at first went through every kind of torment, and then through every kind of rapture, and on the day when the doctor announced that the danger was past, such was his happiness that he tipped the porter 3 solid pieces. One day, while Monsieur Gillenormand sat by Marius's bed, the young man exclaimed, "There's something I have to say to you, grandfather." "What is it?" "I want to get married." "But of course," said the old man, laughing. Marius trembled with sheer amazement. "You shall have her. She comes here every day in the shape of an elderly gentleman who asks for news of you. Since your injury, she has spent her time weeping and making bandages. I know all about her. She lives at number 7, Rue de l'Homme Armé. I have made inquiries. I know that she's charming and good, and that she adores you. So, there you are, and you need say no more. I knew you did not care for me, and I thought, what can I do to make him love me? I thought, I can give him Cosette. You expected me to play the tyrant and ruin everything. Not a bit of it.
Cosette is yours. Nothing could be better. Be so good as to get married, my dear sir, and be happy, my dear boy."
Having said which, the old man burst into tears. He clasped Marius's head to his chest, and they wept together. So Cosette and Marius saw one another again. What it meant to them we shall not attempt to say. There are things beyond description, of which the sun is one. All the household were assembled in Marius's room when she entered. She stood in the doorway, seeming enveloped in a glow of light. Standing behind Cosette was a white-haired man, grave but nevertheless smiling a vaguely touching smile. It was Monsieur Fauchelevent, that is to say, Jean Valjean. Raising his voice and bowing, Monsieur Gillenormand said, "Monsieur Fauchelevent, I have the honor, on behalf of my grandson, Baron Marius Pontmercy, to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage." Monsieur Fauchelevent bowed. "Then that is settled," said the old man. And turning to Marius and Cosette, with arms upraised, he said, "My children, you are free to love one another." No lengthy explanation is needed to understand that after the Jean Mathieu affair, Jean Valjean had been able, during his brief escape to Paris, to withdraw from the bank the money he had accumulated as Monsieur Madeleine. Fearing recapture, he had buried it in the Montfermeil wood. All in all, the sum of 630,000 francs, in banknotes, in an oak chest. In this he had also put the bishop's candlesticks, which he had taken from Montreuil-sur-Mer. Whenever he needed money, Valjean had returned to the clearing, and when he knew Marius to be convalescent, foreseeing that the entire sum would come in useful, he had gone to retrieve it. Valjean had put the silver candlesticks on his mantelpiece, where they glittered to the great admiration of Toussaint. For the rest, Valjean knew that he had nothing more to fear from Javert. It had been reported in the papers that his drowned body had been found under a boat by the Pont Neuf. He had been a policeman with an irreproachable record, highly esteemed by his superiors, who concluded that he must have committed suicide while of unsound mind. Well, reflected Jean Valjean, since he had let me go, that may well be true. Preparations for the wedding were put in hand. It was presently December, and it was arranged to take place in February. Several weeks of perfect bliss ensued, and Monsieur Gillenormand was far from being the least happy. Cosette and Marius had been transported so rapidly from the depths to the heights that they would have been dazed had they not been dazzled. "Do you understand it all?" he asked Cosette. "No, but I feel that God is watching over us." Jean Valjean arranged everything, and made everything easy, speeding Cosette's happiness with as much pleasure, or so it appeared, as she felt herself. Having been a mayor, he knew how to solve an awkward problem, that of Cosette's civic status. To reveal the truth about her origin might, who knows, have prevented the marriage. He endowed her with a dead family, which meant that no one could make demands on her. Jean Valjean, under the name of Fauchelevent, became her guardian, and Monsieur Gillenormand her deputy guardian. Cosette had to learn that she was not the daughter of the old man whom for so long she had addressed as father, and that another man was her real parent. At any other time she would have been greatly distressed, but in her present state of happiness this scarcely troubled her. She had Marius, and the coming of the young man made the older less important. The lovers saw each other every day, Cosette escorted by Monsieur Fauchelevent. Seeing him quietly seated beside Cosette, Marius found it hard to believe that this was the man who had been with him at the barricade. "I must have dreamed it," Marius reflected. "It was someone like him, but certainly not Monsieur Fauchelevent." As for that other man, the one who had saved Marius, the inquiries had at first produced some result, but then had come to a dead end. The police officer who had helped another man save Marius and bring him home was now dead. Marius himself remembered nothing, except that a strong hand had gripped him just as he was sinking unconscious to the ground at the barricade. This man, his saviour, was the man who Marius sought, without discovering any trace of him. What had become of this man who had rescued him, and then presumably been arrested as a rebel? "I would give all," said Marius, "to find that man." Jean Valjean was silent. He was darkly joined in mortal conflict with his own conscience. The question was this: how was he to ensure the continued happiness of Cosette and Marius? It was he who had brought about that happiness, for the most part. He who had forged it. But what was he now to do with it? This happiness that he had brought about. Should he take advantage of it? Treat it as though it belonged to him? Cosette was another man's. But he still retained as much of her as he could ever possess. Could he not continue to be almost her father, respected as he had always been, able when he chose to enter her house? And could he, without saying a word, bring his past into that future? Set himself by that fireside as though it were his right? Could he greet them smiling, with his tragic hands, and cross that innocent threshold, casting behind him the infamous shadow of the law? Could he still keep silent? Pitilessly he considered the facts in all their aspects. Cosette, that exquisite creature, was his lifeline. Was he to cling to it, or let it go? If he clung to it, then he was safe. He could go on living. But if he let go, then the abyss. The day after a wedding is one of solitude. We respect the privacy of the newlyweds, and perhaps their late arising. The hubbub of visits and congratulations does not begin until later. It was a little after midday when there was a tap on the door. There had been no ring, which showed discretion on that particular day. It was Monsieur Fauchelevent. A servant showed him into the salon, which was still in a state of disorder from the wedding celebrations. Some minutes elapsed, during which he remained motionless. He was very pale. His eyes were so sunken with sleeplessness that they almost disappeared, and his black coat had the tired creases of a garment that has been worn all night. He stood looking down at the glow of light cast by the sunshine on the floor. The sound of the door opening caused him to look up. Marius entered, head up and face aglow with triumphant happiness. He too had not slept all night. "Why, it's you, father," he exclaimed. "But you're early. It's only 12:30 and Cosette is still asleep." "Monsieur," said Jean Valjean, interrupting Marius, "I have something to tell you. I am an ex-convict." There are sounds that the mind cannot absorb, although they are registered by the ear. Marius stood open-mouthed, and now he perceived what, in his blissful state, he had not noticed, that the man addressing him was in a very bad shape. He was terribly pale. Marius stammered, What does it mean?" "It means," said Valjean, "that I have been in the galleys. I was in prison for 19 years, first for theft, and later as a recidivist. I am at present breaking parole." Marius might recoil in horror, might refuse to believe, but in the end he was forced to accept it. "You must tell me everything." And this is what Valjean now proceeded to do, though it cost him much pain to talk. The story of Jean Valjean, who became a convict, who became Père Madeleine, and then Monsieur le Maire, the recidivist felon who had become Cosette's only known father, and who had saved Marius his own life. Throughout, Jean Valjean looked steadily at Marius. As for Marius, his thoughts were tumultuous and incoherent. At last he had found the man he sought. But at what price? He was so stupefied that he talked almost as if Valjean had done him a deliberate injury. "Why have you told me all this? Nobody forced you to. You could have kept it to yourself. No one has denounced you. You must have some reason of your own for blurting it out like this. Why have you done so? There must be more, something you haven't told me." I want to know what it is." "My reason," said Jean Valjean, in a voice so low that he might have been talking to himself. "Well, it's a strange reason. A matter of honesty." Valjean began to pace the room. "I ask you to consider this, monsieur. Let us suppose that I had said nothing, but had come to live with you as Monsieur Fauchelevent, to share your daily lives, to walk with Madame Pontmercy in the Tuileries and the Place Royale, and then one day, when we are talking and laughing together, a voice cries, 'Jean Valjean!' and the terrible hand of the police descends on my shoulder and strips the mask away. What do you think of that?" Marius had nothing to say. "Now you know why I could not keep silent. But no matter. Be happy. Be Cosette's guardian angel. Live in the sun, and do not worry about how an outcast goes about his duty. You are facing a wretched man, monsieur." Marius walked slowly across the room, holding out his hand. But he had to reach for Valjean's hand, which made no response. It was like grasping a hand of marble. "My grandfather has friends. I will get you a reprieve." "There is no need. The fact that I am presumed dead is enough." Releasing his hand from Marius's clasp, he added with an implacable dignity, "All that matters is that I should do my duty. The only reprieve I need is that of my own conscience." "Poor Cosette," Marius murmured. "When she hears—" At these words, Jean Valjean trembled in every limb and gazed frantically at Marius. "Monsieur, I beseech you to promise me not to tell her. Surely, if you yourself know, that is enough." "Don't worry," said Marius. "I'll keep your secret." He spoke in a voice that was perhaps less sympathetic than it should have been, conscious as he was of the new situation that had arisen and the huge gulf that lay between them. Making a supreme effort, Valjean said, in a scarcely audible voice, "Tell Cosette I have gone away for a while." And with that he left. Jean Valjean returned to the house in the Rue de l'Homme Armé. In relinquishing his identity as Monsieur Fauchelevent, and thus his role as Cosette's father, he had relinquished the main part of his life. For 10 years Cosette had been his reason for living. Without her, he fell into decline. During the weeks that followed, Valjean did not get out of bed. The concierge said to her husband, "He doesn't get up and he doesn't eat anything. He isn't going to last long. He's very unhappy about something." The concierge saw a local doctor passing the end of the street, and took it upon herself to ask him to go upstairs. When he came down, the doctor said, "The man's very ill indeed." "What's the matter with him?" "Everything and nothing. From the look of him, I'd say he's lost someone very dear to him. One can die of that." "What did he say to you?" "He said he was quite well." "Will you come again, doctor?" "Yes," said the doctor. "But he needs someone other than myself." During those same weeks, Marius remained troubled by the burden of his secret. He longed to be able to tell Cosette everything he knew, but he had given his word to the man he still thought of as Monsieur Fauchelevent. There was only one solution. He would go to him and ask him to reconsider. If not for his own sake, then for Marius's. When he arrived at the Rue de l'Homme Armé, the concierge quickly told him of Monsieur Fauchelevent's condition, and repeated the words of the doctor. Jean Valjean looked round on hearing the knock on his door, and feebly called, "Come in." The door opened. Marius had returned with Cosette. Cosette rushed into the room while Marius stood in the doorway. "Cosette," said Jean Valjean, and sat upright in his chair. his face white and haggard, his arms extended, and the glow of immense happiness in his eyes. Cosette fell into his arms. "Father," she cried. Valjean stammered. "Oh, one can be so stupid. I thought I should never see her again. Do you know, Monsieur Pontmercy, that at the moment when you entered the room, I was saying to myself, I shall never see her again. Oh, how idiotic I was. One forgets to trust in God." "Such a cruel father," said Cosette. "Where have you been? Why were you away so long? You've been ill and you never told us. Marius, take his hand. Feel how cold it is."
"Monsieur Pontmercy," said Jean Valjean, "have you really forgiven me?"
At these words Marius broke down.
"Cosette, did you hear what he said? He asked me to forgive him. And you know what he did? He saved my life. And even more, he gave me you. And then he sacrificed himself by withdrawing from our lives. You're coming with us. You're part of us. You're Cosette's father and mine. I won't allow you to spend another day in this horrible place."
"Certainly I shan't be here tomorrow," said Jean Valjean.
"And what does that mean? We shan't allow you to go on any more journeys. You aren't going to leave us again. You belong to us. We shan't let you go. This time it's final," said Cosette.
Jean Valjean shook his head. "I'm going to die in a little while."
"To die?" exclaimed Marius.
Scarcely taking his eyes off Cosette, Valjean said,
"To die is nothing, but it is terrible not to live."
He was visibly declining, sinking down towards that dark horizon. His breath was coming in gasps, punctuated by slight groans. But as the weakness of his body increased, so his spirit grew in splendor, and the light of the unknown world was already visible in his eyes. His face became paler as he smiled. There was something other than life in it. His breath failed, but his gaze grew deeper. He signed to Cosette to come closer to him, then signed to Marius. It was the last moment of the last hour, and when he spoke, it was in a voice so faint that it seemed to come from a long way off, as though there were a wall between them.
"Come close to me, both of you. I love you dearly. How sweet it is to die like this. And do you love me too? Dear Cosette, you'll weep for me a little, but not too much. I want you to have no great sorrows. You must enjoy life, my children. Cosette, the time has come for me to tell you your mother's name. It was Fantine. You must not forget it. Fantine. And you must bow your head whenever you speak it. She loved you greatly, and she suffered greatly. She was as rich in sorrow as you are in happiness. That is how God evens things out. He watches us all from above and knows what he is doing amid his splendid stars. And now, I must leave you, my children. Love one another always. There is nothing else that matters in this world except love.
Cosette and Marius fell on their knees on either side of him, stifling their tears. His hands rested on their heads and did not move again. He lay back with his head turned to the sky, and the light from the 2 candlesticks fell upon his face.